Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Emile and Victoria Cilliers? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background of this case. I'll move to the timeline of the crime, and offer my analysis. Emile Cilliers was born in South Africa in 1980. His father was an engineer and his mother was a preschool teacher. When he was 16, he started a relationship with a 13-year-old girl named Nicolene Shepard. 3 years later, in 2000, she gave birth to a daughter. In 2002, she would have a son. She thought that she had a good relationship with Emile, even though he had cheated on her in the past. Emile traveled to the United Kingdom and spent some time there. He had an interest in moving there. He joined the British Army in 2004. He ended up marrying another woman in the United Kingdom. Her name was Carly Taylor. This came as a surprise to Nicolene and her 2 children. The family was devastated that Emile left them. Later, Emile told Nicolene that he only married Carly to get a visa. He said that he had divorced Carly. Nicolene resumed their romantic relationship until she found out that he was still married to Carly and they had 2 children together. Nicolene and Carly confronted Emile. He said to them, "Well, here we are. Which one of you wants me?" Emile ended up staying with Carly, but they would get divorced 3 years later in 2009. Prior to his divorce, Emile met a woman named Victoria. Victoria served in the Royal Army Medical Corps as a physiotherapy officer. She met Emile when she was treating him for injuries he sustained in a skiing accident. Victoria had been married before, but she believed that her husband cheated on her, so she left him. Victoria was an experienced skydiver and skydiving instructor. She had completed over 2,600 jumps. Victoria and Emile started dating in March of 2010. They married in South Africa in 2011. The couple would go on to have 2 children. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. On April 5, 2015, Victoria was preparing for a parachute jump. The jump had been arranged by Emile. He told her it was to celebrate having their 2nd child just 5 weeks earlier. The entire family was at a parachute club located at an airfield getting ready for Victoria's jump when Emile carried Victoria's parachute into a toilet stall. He would later claim he did this because his daughter needed to use the facility and he didn't want to leave the parachute unattended. He was in the stall for about 10 minutes. The jump was canceled for that day due to bad weather. Instead of returning the parachute to the normal location in the parachute club, Emile placed it in Victoria's locker. Victoria returned to the airfield the next day, which was Easter Sunday, but the weather was still not great. Rather than not jump at all, Victoria and 11 other skydivers decided to make a low-altitude jump. This way they could stay under the cloud cover. Victoria jumped out of the aircraft at 4,000 feet. When she deployed her main parachute, it became tangled immediately. She cut it loose and used her reserve parachute. It also became tangled. The reserve parachute created some drag, but not even close to enough for a safe landing. At 4:27 p.m., Victoria slammed into a freshly plowed field at 60 miles an hour. She survived, although she did have several severe injuries to her spine, lungs, and ribs. Members of the parachute club examined both of Victoria's parachutes. They concluded that the parachutes had been sabotaged. They notified the police, who sent the parachutes to the British Parachute Association for inspection. The association was suspicious about the failures. In the 10 years before Victoria's jump, there were 2.3 million skydiving jumps in the United Kingdom. Only 2,900 resulted in a reserve parachute being deployed. None of those reserve parachutes failed. In 2003, there was an instance where a 20-year-old officer cadet named Thomas Hilder fell 13,000 feet to his death after both parachutes failed. Later, it was determined that his parachutes were sabotaged. There is still a debate about whether it was murder or Thomas did it himself. As the police were waiting for the results from the Parachute Association, they were contacted by one of Victoria's friends, who said that Emile was manipulative. The police started thinking that Emile may have tried to murder his wife. The Parachute Association completed their examination of Victoria's parachutes. They concluded that both parachutes had been tampered with. The main parachute had the lines wrapped around it, and the reserve parachute had 2 soft links missing. Without these pieces, the parachute would not be functional. Emile was arrested on April 28, 2015, and interrogated for 6 hours. He talked quite a bit. Some of the statements he made to the police made him look guilty. He said that he had a high sex drive and that Victoria had a low sex drive. They only had sex 2 times a week. It was simply not enough for him. He told the police he was having an affair with a woman named Stephanie Galler. Emile mentioned that he was in debt. He admitted going to the toilet stall at the airfield the day before the ill-fated jump. And he never said that he didn't try to kill his wife. Even though it almost sounds like he was confessing, Emile was confident during the interview. He did not admit to any crime. He had an answer for most of the questions. When he came across a question he could not answer, he would become evasive and go off on a tangent. The police seized his cell phone and examined the data. They were surprised to find that Emile and Stephanie had exchanged 32,000 messages in less than 6 months. A few of his messages were suspicious. For example, he told Stephanie that his wife was pregnant with another man's child. He even had DNA testing to prove it. He said he would do anything to be with Stephanie. And he suggested that from April on, he would be able to engage in random and spontaneous activities. Even though Emile seemed to be focused on Stephanie, he was also having sex with a number of other women, including his ex-wife Carly, a number of prostitutes, and women in a local sex club where he was a member. The police were amazed that Emile could keep all of his activities straight. For instance, within a limited time period, he could be having a conversation about shopping with his wife, arranging to meet someone from the sex club, and scheduling a meeting with a sex worker. It was sex-motivated multitasking. Emile was in debt at least £22,000. His wife had loaned him over £19,000 over the last 7 years. He would sometimes use the money to buy extravagant and unnecessary items. The police took this information back to Victoria. They told her that Emile was having an affair, he was planning on leaving her, and he claimed that he was not the father of their son. Victoria mentioned to the police that about 6 days before the jump, there was a gas leak in the kitchen next to the oven. The police examined the gas valve. It had blood on it, which belonged to Emile. The police said that force had been used to loosen the valve, but not to tighten it. The police were now even more convinced that Emile had tried to kill his wife. Emile was charged with 2 counts of attempted murder. By the time he was brought to trial, Victoria had stopped cooperating with the police. She made a number of statements on the stand which helped Emile. She said that she cut away her main parachute even though it was in good operating condition. So she was saying that she made a mistake. It was an error in judgment to cut that parachute loose. She said that she lied to the police about how long Emile was in the toilet stall. She said it wasn't 10 minutes, rather only 5 minutes. Victoria also testified that she is the one who caused the gas leak. She lied because she wanted Emile to suffer. Even with this incredibly damaging testimony to the Crown's case, the jury could not agree on a verdict. A mistrial was declared in November of 2017. Emile was tried for a second time. This time, the prosecution presented his thousands of text messages. He was found guilty of all charges. Emile was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 18 years. Now moving to my analysis. Emile was very popular with women. He was considered charming and romantic. Some consider his charm to be almost magical, citing the effect that he had on Victoria. Victoria essentially testified that she lied about everything related to the attempted murder plots. In addition, after Emile was sentenced to prison, Victoria said that she did not accept the verdict. She went on to say that her family, friends, and everyone seems to think they know more than she does. She said that Emile was unfaithful, had issues with money, but this was not an attempted murder. Emile was a passionate, intense alpha male soldier and sex addict, but she did not think he was capable of murder. One of the most amazing aspects of this case is this reaction by Victoria. For her to use words like intense alpha male soldier and sex addict, yet still think that Emile would have never involved himself in an attempted murder. Emile manipulated Victoria, cheated on her, and tried to kill her twice, but she chose to defend him. Another way to look at this case is that Victoria's testimony was truthful. Maybe she did make up stories about Emile. She could have been angry at him and decided that she wanted to frame him. Perhaps she was just trying to end her own life when she jumped out of the plane with defective parachutes. This brings me to the question, was Emile guilty of attempted murder? Let's take a look at the factors both for and against the idea that Emile was guilty, starting with the inculpatory evidence. A few days before Victoria's jump, Emile searched for a wet nurse online, as if he knew that his wife would not be able to feed their 5-week-old son. Blood belonging to Emile was found near the gas valve in the kitchen, and the markings on the fitting matched his channel locks, a type of pliers often used on pipes. Emile was over 22,000 pounds in debt, and Victoria had a life insurance policy for 120,000 pounds. Emile had transferred 6,000 pounds from his wife's savings account without her knowledge. When she found out, he told her the account had been hacked. Investigators found that the IP address from the hacker matched the computer in the family home. Emile had a long history of manipulating women. He was cheating with multiple women. He specifically mentioned the idea of having more freedom after April, which was when his wife almost died in the jump. He lied to one of his girlfriends by telling her he wasn't the father of the son that he had with Victoria. He allegedly pushed a woman at the sex club and was kicked out of the club for breaking their rules. The jump from the airplane was his idea. The day before the jump, Emile took his wife's parachute into a toilet stall, even though the stall was tiny. He put the parachute in her locker afterward, which was out of the ordinary. When his wife came home from the hospital, he said he was too busy to take care of her. His employer even offered to give him time off, but he wouldn't take it. Moving to the exculpatory evidence. There are no witnesses to and no video of Emile committing any crime. Emile had a number of relationships with women. He never tried to kill any of them. If Victoria had found out about his multiple affairs, she would have been angry with him. Framing him for a murder would be one way to get back at him. Victoria testified that she lied to the police. She is the one who tampered with the gas valve, and nothing was wrong with her main parachute. The only physical evidence tying Emile to the crime was his blood near the gas valve. No physical evidence connected him to the parachute sabotage. When considering all the evidence, do I think that Emile was guilty? I think he was guilty in reality, but there is no way he was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. This could have been a hoax perpetrated by Victoria, which is essentially what she now claims. When she testified at a second trial, she said that she lied. I think what happened in this case is that the Crown Prosecution Service understood how Emile had narcissistic and psychopathic characteristics. They looked at his extensive history of manipulating women. They realized they would never be able to put together a strong case against him if it was based on the testimony of his lovers. To protect people from him in the future, they were willing to proceed forward with a shaky case. I think the Crown wasn't really worried about how the evidence against him was not compelling. They tried to make the case about his personality by presenting the thousands of text messages. They knew if the verdict was going to be guilty, it would need to be an emotional verdict rather than a rational verdict. Even though I agree that Emile is guilty, bending the rules to convict him is not consistent with justice. Strictly speaking, as I indicated, I believe there was reasonable doubt in this case. Now moving to my final thoughts. This is yet another case that speaks to the dangers of narcissism in the context of romantic relationships and the importance of setting boundaries in those relationships. Some people really struggle with denying a narcissist anything that they want. There have been cases where narcissists have stolen thousands of dollars from victims, and the victims just keep giving the narcissist money. There have been cases where narcissists have convinced victims to become conspirators in serious crimes, even when the victim would not benefit from that in any way. And we see this case with Emile, where he attempted to murder his wife twice, and she still would not testify against him. What's more, she testified that she was lying in order to help him avoid being convicted. This is one of those cases that reminds people that some victims cannot set any limits. If a husband trying to murder his wife twice isn't enough to kill the romance, their toxic love is kind of like a skydiver with a malfunctioning parachute. It will be an exciting ride, but will certainly come to a definitive and crushing end. Those are my thoughts on the case of Emile and Victoria Cilliers. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comments section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis to be as intriguing as a free-falling relationship featuring a tiny toilet stall parachute sabotage. Thanks for watching.